If you already have the pencil drawing done from the pencil video, you can skip forward to about 11:30 in this video, because the first section of this covers the pencil drawing again in case you skip that. So if you have the pencil drawing already, you can skip to 11:30 here. If not, the first 11:30 of this video will cover the pencil drawing section so that you get your pencil drawing set and then can use that for the watercolor crayon resist section. Either way is fine. Enjoy the painting.
Push any important keys on my keyboard, which is, all that really matters. Alright, so we got a piece of paper. We have a cat who is leaving the desk and hopefully going over somewhere else without knocking too many things over on his way, because that's just the way he rolls. And we need a pencil with a point. I do have a pencil sharpener, but for some reason some of these pencils don't seem to sharpen very well, so it's better if I just find one that has a point already. Here we go. Pencil with a point. So, what should we do? One method for drawing things, if you're getting started, is to use tracing paper. Oh boy, that's watercolor paper. Tracing paper, and you can see that I use this one for a rocket. And then graphite paper, which is what you use to transfer the image that you've traced down onto your destination paper. And I do a different workshop on using tracing paper and graphite paper. So if you want a reasonably exact duplicate of it, this is one way to get started and to get some practice in doing this sort of thing. But we're going to do it freehand this time. And I'm going to do this to show you, because my hands tend to be a little shaky, to not worry about it if you are not the most perfect drawer or the most accurate drawer, because part of the beauty of being an artist is that you are making your own personal recreation. So if you really care about being accurate, and that's the kind of look you're going for, you can get the tracing paper and the graphite, and you can get rulers and all those other kinds of things. But if you're looking to show your unique vision of the scene, then it's okay to let those kinds of things go and to say, okay, there's plenty of impressionists out there who did rough representations of scenes, and their art is pretty too. So you will do what you want to do, and that will be okay. So when I look at this scene, I am thinking I could just draw pretty much a rectangle and then make little dotted spots in it, but I'm going to make this a little more interesting. I'm going to represent my own unique vision of this. So I'm going to push that stuff a little, and I'm going to put my piece of paper sideways. And I think that I am going to put the tower on the right, and then I am going to put something on the left. Maybe some extra little castle parts. I'm going to turn this into a base of a castle, and that way I have the design for the castle, and then I will be able to expand on it. So let me put this over here. Alright, so I'm sort of drawing at an angle too, because I have to work around the tripod that this camera is on. So it even just adds more challenges to me getting this straight. Maybe I'll move my keyboard up a little so I have somewhere to rest my hand. There we go. Get the cat fur off of this. Alright, so you always want to leave space around the edge of your picture, because if you decide to frame this at some point, the way frames work is they tend to cover the edges of it. So the more that you can have non-important stuff at the edges, you don't want your design to go out to the very edge. You want to have just sky or grass or something around the four edges, and that way when you put the frame around it or the mat around it or whatever, you're not covering up something important like the tower. So you wouldn't want to put the tower right at the edge here. We'll put it in a little bit. So we'll start the tower over here. How's that? And you see it's not quite straight, but I am okay with that. I'm drawing at an angle. I'm drawing sideways. And this is an example. But the idea is you just do what you're going to do. Alright, is that sort of what it is? Yeah. And then we've got this piece. Now the grass comes up like this. And actually, we're not going to do that side yet because I have some thoughts. But we're going to put in the door. Alright. And I'm going to pretend that this is part of a medieval kind of setup, because that's the way that I like to do things. So I am going to add a crenellated top to it. Crenellated is when it has the wiggly up and down areas, and that let archers in the old days hide between them and protect the castle from marauding attacking troops. Alright. Alright, so it's got a crenellated top. Now, what else does it have over here? Let's say that there's a gate that this tower, and the reason it only has, I said there was a door, but it's high up off the ground, so that's probably some sort of a window. Let's say it's a window. And then we get some shutters. It's a closed window. Here we go. So now, how does someone get into this tower? Maybe it's connected to a bigger building, and in this bigger building is how people get in. They go in from the building side. So we will build a gatehouse. Okay, so this gatehouse, this will have the actual door. Alright, this will have more crenellations, because you can never have too many crenellations. And then, see, it's sort of slanting because I'm doing this at an angle, but that's okay. Your picture is fine however it is. Don't worry about all that kind of stuff. The more one practices, the more that you're able to release your own particular vision. If you say, well, I want the ground straighter, well, you can either pull out your eraser, or I recommend just going forward and seeing what else you can work on this one, because if you spend all your time erasing and erasing, unless you're low on paper, if you're low on paper, then go ahead and do some sort of erasure. But if you are not, then just keep going forward. They used to make windows really skinny back in the old days in their castles because they wanted to make sure that incoming arrows couldn't easily get in. It would make it a lot harder for archers to shoot arrows into the building and hurt people. So a lot of these things were designed to keep themselves safe from attack. Alright, so now we're going to put in some lines. Make bricks. Just checking. Alright, so now I have a scene here that I have drawn out. Oh, wait. Alright, Speaking of erasers. Alright, I have the background this high over here, and then I drew it straight out over there. Should actually be this high to be consistent. So you do want to be a little consistent in your picture in general. You don't have to be, but we'll just get our trusty eraser. There we go. See, things can be fixed. Alright, and if you want, you can make a little path. What else does this need? Maybe a flag. A pennant. Alright, so now we draw a pencil drawing. If we wanted to, we could draw some details of the rocks in there. And we could draw more details about the tower. But I think this is a pretty good starting point for doing a drawing. So your drawing, of course, will look whatever you want to. You could have just done the basic tower if you want, and that's plenty fine. Or you could have had your tower come up into anything else, any other kind of construction or castle, or you can make it into a windmill. There's all sorts of options that you can do. So try out your creativity and try different combinations of drawing things with the pencil, because this will be the starting point for any sort of next step that you take. So this is a tower at the St. Joseph's Abbey in Spencer, and what I've done as a starting point is I have drawn the tower as part of a castle setup with a gatehouse and another tower and a pennant and so on, and I drew this on watercolor paper. Watercolor paper is a little thicker than regular paper, so it absorbs the water better, and that way when you're painting on it with water, the water doesn't buckle and soak through the thinner kind of paper that you would normally use in a printer. So I do recommend getting some watercolor paper. They have it very inexpensively at Job Lot and other places like that if you don't have any in the house. And I have a tin of watercolors. You can use whatever kind of watercolors. They sell very inexpensive watercolors for under $1 at many places like Job Lot as well. So what we're going to do in this example is called a crayon resist. So you can see I have a box of crayons over here. Try and grab it. And we are looking for a white crayon. White because it matches the color of the paper, and so it becomes sort of invisible. If you use a different crayon, it will still work, it just won't be as invisible. So the first step is to trace over all of the lines that you've drawn in pencil with your white crayon. So I'm going to start on my right side and work over, because you'll see, or I suppose you won't see, which is part of the trick of all of this, is that when you're drawing these white lines, you can't really see that you've done it, because the white pretty much blends in with the background color. And this is nice for the ending effect, but it makes it a little hard to know what you have drawn and what you have not drawn. So if you start at one end and work your way across, that helps to keep you on track and make sure that you do not miss anything. Now what's going to happen is that these crayons are made of wax, or a waxy substance, and the watercolor will not be able to get through the wax. So when you're doing, let's do the door first. When you're doing the watercolor painting, the water and the color of the watercolor paint will not be able to reach the paper. You're forming a barrier with this crayon that the watercolor color and water cannot get through. So all of these places that you are blocking with this crayon are going to stay white, and then everywhere else will be colorful. So this is a way of making your own coloring book in essence, because you're making these boundaries with the watercolor paint will not go through. And what's also neat is that the watercolor is not, or the crayon is not a very precise tool. It's, you know, round and it's sort of lumpy, and it's going to make an imperfect line. So it'll have all sorts of little craggy parts and crenellations. And to me, that adds to the unique prettiness of it. So it's not even like you're going to have very sharp lines for all these sections. You'll have lines with little nooks and crannies in them. And to me, that makes it show even more that this is a handmade piece of art and not something kicked out by a machine or a computer. We now have computers writing essays and painting paintings and designing buildings, so I think it's good to still have things that humans do. And maybe the fact that our drawings are not precise and have the mark of actually being made by a human's hand is what makes it special. Alright, so I believe, since I worked from right to left, that I get everywhere, and if you sort of wiggle the paper around in the light, the crayon part shines a little, so that'll help you see what you've done. Alright, so now I'm going to show you a couple of techniques for painting in the watercolor. Let's see how I can lay this out here. Put the water over there. Put this up a little higher. I'll put the watercolor paints down here. I'm sort of having to work at an angle here to get around the camera tripod, so you probably won't have quite as much trouble as I do dealing with this. Alright, I wonder if, yeah, it doesn't matter if you see all the watercolor colors. This just happens to be I bought this as an empty tin, and all of these little things were empty, and then I bought some inexpensive paints and tubes like this, and then I just squished the different colors into the different bins, and that way, instead of having to deal with the tubes all the time, I could just put it in. And the benefit of doing this over buying a pre-made pan that you often see in schools is, in this case, if you use a lot of a particular color, like this particular blue, now if I had a pan, that might make that set of pan less useful, because now there wasn't any blue left. But with this setup, I can just pick up the tube and just squish some more blue in there and still have my full set of colors. So this works better in the long term, because as you run out of a particular color, you just fill it in again. And let's say I never ever ended up using this blue, I could decide at some point, well, clearly that blue's just not something that I'm interested in, and I could empty that blue out completely and put another color in there that I happen to use more often. So something to think about as you get into watercolors. Alright, so we got a brush. So let's start with the idea of wet on wet. Alright, we have this big space here, and this big space could be all one color, or it could be different colors. So I'm going to show you the wet on wet technique. So what this means is I take regular water, this is just water over here, no color at all, and with just water I'm going to paint in this stone tower area. So this is a tower that is actually out at the St. Joseph's Abbey. So you can go visit it and see it in person, take photos of it. So I am just getting this space ready by getting it wet with water. And you can't see anything because water in general is invisible. All it's doing is wetting the surface. I just have to try to make sure that I've got it all, because it's sort of hard to tell what I've painted wet and what I have not painted wet. And also it seems to be fairly dry in this house this morning, so the water is evaporating pretty quickly. Alright, so there we go. We got the water painted in. Alright, so what color do we want to make this? Let's make it blue and purple. I just happen to like those colors. Alright, so we'll get a little blue and my blue pen. And now if we just touch spots in here, you'll see that it spills out all on its own. It's absorbing out into that water around it. So a benefit of wet and wet is that it makes all these pretty splotchy things. And it sort of goes where it wants to go. So I'm going to get some purple, which is over here. Add the purple in. You can use whatever colors you want, of course, and you could do whatever style you want. You can have like all the blues at the top. You could do gold and have all the golds at the bottom. Whatever you want, but in general the idea is that these colors are just going to merge and move however they want to. So you get some sort of a nice effect there. And the little spaces between them sort of look like the mortar between the stones. So we've got that part done. Now let's do a different way to show you a comparison. Alright, so see this other tower, the skinnier tower over on the left? We are not going to paint it with water first. We are just going to paint it with a color. Let's see, what color should we use? I'm keeping green because I want to use green for the grass in the bottom, so I don't want to make the castle in green. Let's do a different shade of blue. Keep with our blues theme. So I happen to have multiple shades of blue, so I'm going to make my brush a little wet, and then I'm going to brush the brush against the color to get some of the color on the brush. And now the paper is dry over here, and I'm going to paint. And when I paint on dry paper, the paint only goes where my brush goes. It does not spread or do all those other kinds of things, because I'm painting down onto dry. And I'm going up against the edge. And again, I'm sort of doing this at an angle because of the tripod. So it's sort of rough to try to get this. But the point of this is to show that your own style is fine, and if it's a little rough, that's fine. That shows that it's made by hand, not by a computer program. Right. Go around the little arrow things. There we go. And it's okay if there's lighter areas and darker areas, because castles were often repaired all the time. And the repairs would end up with darker sections and lighter sections. You've probably seen this if you go into old buildings and see how they have the different repairs. You can also smooth it out if you want to. And on the edge, it's now hitting against the crayon, and the crayon is causing these rough edges, which I enjoy. There we go. So we've got a tower that was done with dry paper and wet brush, and then we have the other castle area that was done with wet on wet. So two different kinds of techniques. Alright, let's do the crenellated top over here with some purple. Alright, purple crenellations. Alright. And we'll put some purple up here in the dome. And we'll give it a purple banner. Keep our purple theme going. Alright. What are these doors going to be? Remember, this is your world. If you want to make your doors bright red, you can. I'm going to be a little more traditional and go with a brown for the doors. Paint this in. Now, a thing with watercolors is that you could paint one layer and say that you are done, and that layer represents your vision. But many artists in watercolors paint in multiple layers, and they let each layer dry in general before they start the next layer, because if you painted multiple layers while the water was still wet, it would do this sort of thing. Everything would merge in together. And sometimes that's the style that you want, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you want some areas to be a little darker and some areas to be a little lighter and create some sorts of effects like that. And if you're doing that sort of thing, then in general you want each section to dry before you start the next layer, so that you maintain some sort of control over what you're doing. Let's put the flagpole. Oh, I think I made the crayon too tight, so this is all crayon in here now, and the little bits won't stick. We might get some of it. Let's see if we get that to stick. Alright, let's put the grass in while I'm thinking of it. So I'm going to paint the grass with water and do the same wet on wet technique. Now I have to be careful to leave a little bit of space between the grass and this purple tower over here. There should be a full crayon barrier between the two, but if I manage to miss a little bit of the crayon, and then the green gets through that little hole that I left behind, then I'll have green grass growing up into my tower, which, you know, isn't a bad thing. Maybe it represents ivy, but it's better to know what's going to happen and have some control over it, rather than having something happen that you didn't want to have happen. So, because I painted this area with water, you see how the green is blossoming like that? So now it makes a sort of dappled effect. And it gives it more of a natural kind of feel to it. So maybe there's some bushes in there, or so on. There's a cat hair in there. I wonder why there's a cat hair on my piece of paper. Maybe because a cat was climbing around in here. You can get cat's hairs or brush hairs and stuff off after the fact, so you don't need to worry about them too much. You can just brush them away at the end. Alright, so we're going to do some water over on this side. I found watercolor painting to be very meditative and relaxing. You sort of have to give up full control over what you're doing, because this water's going to have a mind of its own, and sometimes it's going to go places that you didn't mean for it to go. And you have to accept that life is like that. Life is just not always under your control. And you have a plan, but then plans are going to change. So sort of a meditative experience that helps you with all of life. And say, alright, I'm going to try to do something like this. And if it works, that's lovely. And if it does something different, well, then maybe I've learned something new. And that's the other benefit of this, that the more you do it, the more you come up with ideas, and you see what kind of color combinations you like, and you practice your drawing skills, and it all builds on each other. Alright, so let's put some more green up here. Alright, so now we got a green ground. Alright, let's make a path in the middle. Oh, what color the path should be? Make it gray. Gray brown. There we go. Alright, so we got a little gray-brown path in there. I want to add a little more purple to this area. Purple. There we go. Might as well just make a section around there. There we go. See, and you can add things as you go. So let's say we want another window up here. We can just sort of add it in now. And this is going to spread where it wants to spread. So that's part of it. You have to accept that this being watercolor and wet, it's going to spread a little, but that's part of the charm of what it's going to do. Alright, maybe we should make these windows over here of black. Besides, this part is a little slim. Alright. What color should we make the middle part? Well, I have a blue and purple theme going, but I don't know if I want everything here to be blue and purple. And bricks are sort of traditionally red. What do you guys think? I'm sort of resisting putting a giant block of red in the middle of my blues and purples though. Maybe we'll go with a different blue. I'll go with my favorite blue, which is clear because there's hardly any of it left. I think it's time for me to find a new bin at some point. I'm going to paint the blue. Oh, see, look. And you can see, well here, let me do the other one so you can see more clearly. When I'm painting over the space on the right, the crayon resist is resisting at the lines of the brick. So where there's brick, I had drawn over that with crayon, and even though I'm painting across it, there's little spaces are showing up where the water and the paint do not connect down with the paper. But apparently I never got around to doing the crayon lines on this side over here. So you can see that this side just ended up being a solid watercolor painting because there was no resist happening on those lines. I did not draw those lines with crayon. So that's one way of figuring out that you forgot to do lines somewhere. So how can we fix this? Well, let me finish the rest of the section up here, just so I have everything done to start with. Alright, so what we can do is completely rinse off our brush. So right now it just has water, and when it just has water, it's going to act sort of like an eraser. It's going to pick up the paint, because I'm just brushing at it with clean water. So I'm rinsing off any paint that I happen to pick up. I'm getting off most of the water so that I don't create a mess while I'm doing this. So we're rinsing off the blue paint that I just picked up. Squeezing off any extra water so that it's reasonably dry. So it's not getting quite down to the white. There's still a bit of blue stain there. But if I wanted to, I could now draw the crayon in where I meant to put it originally. Alright, so I've now got, it's not going to look quite as white as those other places, but that's alright. I'll put in some darker color over here. There we go. Alright. Blue everywhere. Some more blue. And when colors dry, they tend to dry a little lighter than what you thought you were putting down. So, in many cases you might come back and put down a second layer to get the effect that you were aiming for. That's what watercolor is all about. It's all about layers. Alright, so see, it's not quite as dark because of me missing out on the crayon in there in the first place, but that's okay. That is just one of the interesting aspects of watercolor painting. Alright, you can sort of press with your finger to see if things are dry. So if I wanted to put a doorknob on this door, if I had done it when that brown was wet, then the brown of the doorknob would have done this kind of blossom effect. It would have spread out and gone into different areas. So if I wait until it's dry, and then try to put, let's see if we'll find out if it's dry. There we go. So see, when it's dry, the paint stays where I put it. It doesn't spread. If I did it when it was wet, then it would spread out. So for example, let's see if this window area is dry. No, see, that's still a little wet, but I bet it might be dry enough. No, see how it's spreading a little? So it's still a little too wet to control. But we'll do that. It'll still spread. See how it's spreading a little out there? So things will spread if things are wet, and they will stay put if they're dry. So like this blue over here is dry now. So if I decided I wanted to put in some thin stripes in purple, so we will put in stripes like this. And because the blue layer is dry, these purple stripes are not blending in with the blue and turning into splotches. So part of this is some patience and waiting into the areas that you want to do this sort of thing with are definitely dry so that things do not meld. There we go. Alright, so we have a number of different techniques here. Well, what color should we make the crenellations? How about yellow? I've got a couple yellows. How about this yellow? More water. There we go. Yellow for the top crenellations. Alright. Now we have a blue sky. Now I've made lots of other things here blue. So one question is, how am I going to make the blue of the sky stand out from the blue of the castle itself. And a solution is to use a different shade of blue. If you have a paint set like mine where you have different shades of blue, then that is pretty straightforward. You just choose another shade. If you don't, then you can mix watercolors. And that's one of the beauties of using watercolors, is how you can mix them. So let's see how to mix colors. You might remember that certain colors have known mixing quantities. Red plus yellow makes orange. Blue plus red makes purple, and that kind of stuff. So what we'll do is we'll start with a blue, and let's choose this blue. We'll put a bunch of this blue down over here on the side in the mixing area. And you can use a paper plate or anything that you want for mixing. Alright, so we got some blue there. And I'm looking out the window at my own sky. And the sky seems to be a little bit yellower than this. So I'm going to rinse the blue out of my thing. I'm going to put down some more water so I have some more content to work with. Now I'm going to add in some yellow. There we go. It gets a little bit of a green tinge to it, but that's okay. So now, let's get this out of the way. I like that sort of gentle light effect to it that is being caused by me having put water down in the first place. When you do this kind of mixing of colors, it's good to mix the amount of color that you think you're going to need so that it all gets put down onto the paper with about the same colorness. And you know, it takes a little practice to figure out how much you need to mix up to be able to cover the space you're working on. But let's say I only made like a tiny little drop of this blue and I started painting with it, and then I said, oh, I'm going to need more blue. Then I'd have to try to mix the right amount of the source blue and the yellow to get this same shade again so that they match, and that could end up being a little tricky. So it's better to do as much as you need in the first place. And the beauty of watercolors is that they don't go bad. Now you can see these watercolors in the tin. These are dry. They came out of tubes and I squished them into these little spots and they dried out, and then to use them I just take a brush with some water on it and I sorry get a drink, and then once I wet it, it's just fine again. Here we go. A little better. Alright. So we're painting this. Leaving some space. Grab the flag. So I'm just painting this area with water, because we're going to do wet on wet. Getting a little bit of my blue. Sort of spreads and does what it wants. There goes with that fluffy sky look. Well, I could leave white areas if I wanted to leave clouds. Oh, my cat's feeling a little, yep, no, see, this is exactly what I was thinking. No, kitty, you can't come over right now because you're going to get little kitty footprints all over the watercolor. I know, you want to go play. You'll have to play later. You're a good kitty. Kitty likes to chew on the brush. Kitty likes to drink the water. Kitty likes to put little kitty footprints in the middle of the paintings. But right now Kitty's being a very good kitty and just curling up to the immediate right of this painting. So yes, you're being a wonderful kitty. Wonderful, happy kitty. You just stay right there, sweetie. You are so helpful. And if you're going to frame this, then all these edges are going to be covered by the matting in the frame of it. So I suppose that's something to mention. If you choose to frame a watercolor, you want to do it with a mat. And a mat puts a cardboard edge around the four sides. And the purpose of the cardboard edge is to make a space of just a little bit, like a, an eighth of an inch or something, between the surface of the paper and the glass that's on the front of the frame, because you don't want the glass to be touching the paper, because this is water-based, and if you get any sort of condensation or anything in there, the picture is going to smear and get ruined. So you want a little bit of space to exist between the glass, which floats off from the paper, and the mat and the edge provides that little bit of space for you. So that's the purpose of the mat. And it adds a little bit of color, or if you use a white mat, it just adds a little bit of framing offset to your painting. But in general, for watercolors, its main purpose is to make sure that the surface of the watercolor does not press up against the glass. And in general, it's a good idea if you want to hang watercolors to put them under glass, because if they do get, like I said, condensation or such, then they could start to run or get damaged by that. Oh, the cat's eating the edge of the brush. Are you gonna get bored with this in a moment or two? Yes, it's a brush. Nice and chewy. You are so helpful to make sure my brush is properly chewed. You're a good kitty. Good kitty. Is that nice? Can I get you enough chew toys for this very reason? Alright, so let's take a look at our painting. One other thing we can do is we can add a bit of shadow. In our natural world, we have a sun up in the sky, and when it shines down on our world, it ends up causing shadows to form. So if we assume that the sun in this picture is up over here in this direction, in the top right of the picture, then the shadows would end up falling on the left-hand side of objects. So if the sun was up here and the sun was shining this way, then this side of the tower here would be a little more in shadow. So we could put a little bit purple shadow on this side to show that this is where the sun was shining against it. I was helped by the kitty. Yes, thank you so much, kitty. They're trying to help me paint the shadow in. Right, get a little more of this blue. Put it a little darker on this side. Just different things you can choose to do, or you don't have to do it if you don't want to. Alright, so we got a little more shadow on the left-hand side of things, because we're assuming the sun is coming from the right. That shows you the basic of how a crayon watercolor resist works. So you can use this technique in all sorts of different ways. You can use the crayon to put details into the middle of an image. You can use it just to create the outline of an image and then paint whatever else you want on the inside. You know, for example, I did not have crayons showing me where those purple stripes were over in this tower over here. I just drew them in and then let them go where they wanted to go. So you still have flexibility over what you want to do. I'm going to erase out this line with just some water. So you can sort of scrub away lines. No, kitty. No, you were so tempted by this. Kitty. No, you want to go that way, and I'm saying that you can't go that way. Oh no. No, I've got both of the kitties. Not the other one's looking out the window. Alright, so maybe this one. No. Come on, sweetie. Alright, I have rescued the painting from the onslaught of the kitty. I'm tempted to put a dragon in or something, but no, I'm going to stop. So that's the basics of doing a crayon resist watercolor painting. I've got all the cats now trying to come participate in this. Come on, sweeties. You have a whole house to go explore. You do not need to climb over me. Alright, so that's a crayon resist watercolor painting. And you can see that I made my pencil lines fairly dark here so that you could be able to see them on the video. But in reality, if you made the pencil lines light, then they would almost become invisible by the time you got to this stage, and it would just look like the watercolor design and then some white spaces where you ended up drawing with the crayon. So you can do that technique, or you can leave it so that you can see the crayon if you want to have that kind of style. It is wholly up to you. So let me know if you have any questions about how a crayon resist watercolor works. And thank you for watching this segment.